na? Oo, na-start na. Oo, na-start na.
Ginago. Hi, good noon everyone. We are the group 4 and we are here to report about the IPE of OPEC and oil and its variations. But before we proceed to the discussion, let us go ahead and start it with a prayer. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Father, we thank you for your grace, love, and mercy that has been extended to us one more time. We thank you for protecting us and keeping us in our right minds, especially throughout this pandemic. Lord, we thank you for granting us this opportunity to come together in this fashion to increase our knowledge. Lord, you said that if anyone lacks wisdom, they should ask you and you will give liberally without reservation. I pray today that you grant us wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. That all we pray, amen. All right. For this one, once again, we are the group 4 and we are here to discuss and to identify the different variations of the IPE, OPEC, and oil. And I be the one who will first to discuss the IPE of OPEC and oil and its history. Once again, let me just go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Chanel May Amicapala. And for the objectives of the study, they are presented below the most essential terms that will be explained for you to have a better understanding of this section in the course. One is the IPE of OPEC and oil, and number two is the global problems. All right. The OPEC and oil. The Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, which is OPEC, it is an intergovernmental organization of 13 countries. The Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries is a cartel consisting of 13 of the world's major oil exporting nations, which is OPEC aims to regulate the supply of oil in order to set the price on the world market. The formation of OPEC marked a turning point towards the national sovereignty over natural resources. And OPEC decides have decisions rather have come to play a prominent role in the global oil market and international relations. The effect can be particularly strong when wars or civil disorders lead to extended interruptions in supply. Excuse OPEC, it is a multinational organization that was established to coordinate the petroleum policies of its members and to provide member states with technical and economic aid. It also coordinates and consolidates the policies about petroleum production and output involving its member nations. So the term OPEC it refers to group of 13 of the world's major oil exporting nations, which is Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. This is the five founders plus the Algeria, Angola, Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, Libya, Nigeria, and the United Arab Emirates. For this one, the OPEC, the arrival of fracking technology for natural gas in the U.S. has reduced OPEC's ability to control the world market. The organization was established in 1960 by its founding members Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. So the OPEC ensures that there is a steady supply of oil in the global market. It has come under fire for holding considerable power in the industry, which allows it to keep prices as high as possible. And OPEC controls over 50, just to inform you that OPEC controls over 50% of global oil supplies and about 90% of proven oil reserves. This dominant position ensures that the coalition has a significant influence on the price of oil, at least in the short term. For this one, according to the OPEC website, um, the group mission is to coordinate and unify the petroleum policies of its member countries and ensures that there is a steady supply of oil in the global market. And for this one also, it has a steady income to the producers and a fair return on capital for those investing in the petroleum industry. The organization committed to finding ways to ensure that oil prices are stabilized in the international market. So, what drives crude oil prices? Crude oil production by the OPEC is an important factor that affects oil prices. The organization seeks to actively manage oil, oil production in its member countries by setting production targets. Also, despite of the OPEC efforts to manage production and maintain targeted price levels, there are also member countries that do not always comply with the production targets adopted by the organization. That's why there are many oil prices can be affected by member countries' unwillingness to maintain production targets. Um, and just a little trivia: natural gas liquids or the NGLs are not included in OPEC production allocations and can provide substantial additional volumes to world liquid supply. Next. And moving forward, we will tackle about the history of OPEC. So, OPEC, the formation of OPEC. OPEC was established at a conference held in Baghdad, September 10 to 14, 1960, which is and was formally constituted in January 1961. OPEC's headquarters first located in Geneva and was moved to Vienna in 1965 at semi-annual and special meetings of the OPEC conference. So the board of governors, which is responsible for managing the organization, convening the conference, and drawing up the annual budget, contains representatives appointed by each member country. Each chair is elected to a one-year term by the conference. The OPEC claims also that members collectively own about four-fifths of the world's proven petroleum reserves, while they account for two-fifths of world oil production. So the in next So for this one, the influence of individual OPEC members on the organization and on the oil market usually depends on their levels of reserves and production. Like Saudi Arabia, which controls about one third of the OPEC's total oil reserves, which plays a leading role in the organization. So when OPEC, just a little background, when OPEC was formed in 1960, the main goal was to prevent its concessionaries, which is the
Kalipo na dyan.
largest oil producers, refiners, and marketers. So OPEC rise to power in 1970s. When OPEC rise to power in 1970s and prominence in global oil market as well as the international relations which occurred in the 1970s with OPEC's emphasis on exercising national sovereignty over natural resources. So it's the price wars and price plunges in 1980s. In this era, after skyrocketing with the outbreak of the Iran in and Iraq war, prices eroded gradually due to a combination of a global oil glut as exploration in non-OPEC countries increased, which is falling demand due to decreased economic activity in industrialized nations and energy conservations in response to astronomical gas prices. So, as oil prices began to fall because of the Iran and Iraq war, OPEC kept oil production low in an attempt to keep prices out. So next is the stable and the then not so stable in the year 1990s, which is the new production here. There is the new production quota system, which is stabilized and seemed to succeed where the previous one had failed. So the price on this era is prices begun to creep up during the rest of the decade to around $20 per barrel. And the next is the Ascension, which is in year 2000s, which prices eventually recovered and OPEC announced a new price band mechanism in March of 2000. So what is in the year 2000, what is the price band mechanism? So this was designed to essentially essentially keep oil within a range of $22 to $28. So, if the prices for a reference basket of crude oil fell below the lower end of the range, OPEC would automatically increase production, and if it is past the higher amount or the higher end, they would automatically decrease the production. So next is the prices plunge before the OPEC deal in year 2010. So discontent began to surface among the OPEC members. Prices began to rise and a failed meeting to increase output was declared by Saudi Arabia oil minister, which is Ali Al Naimi, as one of the worst meetings that they ever had. So, basically, as I have read a lot of articles, has OPEC been a success? Looking back at the OPEC's history, one would be hard pressed to say that OPEC has been an overwhelming success. Although they have many of the world's largest oil producers on the book, they have failed to get a hold of the global oil market and stabilize prices, which is OPEC is a portal where therefore left much to be desired. So OPEC in fighting has been part of the problem as well as their inability over the years to stay disciplined and adhere to agreements made. So that would be my report. The next I will give the stage to the next reporter.
All right. Once again, good noon. Thank you so much for that report, Ma'am Janelle. I would just like to summarize all the facts that have been stated recently. So, next slide, please. So, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, also known as OPEC, was established at a conference in Baghdad on September 10 to 14, 1960. It was constituted in January 1961 by the first five countries on the list, namely Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and Venezuela. Next slide, please. And after which, after these five countries, these next members were admitted afterward, which is Qatar in 1961, Indonesia in 1962, Libya in 1962 as well, Abu Dhabi 1967, Algeria 1969, Nigeria 1971, Ecuador 1973, Angola 2007, Equatorial Guinea 2017, and the Republic of the Congo 2018. So, yes, as what Ma'am Janelle said a while ago, these OPEC members coordinate policies on oil prices, production, and related matters at semi-annual and special meetings of the OPEC conference. Now, in the aspects of their structure, the OPEC has board of governors, where they have representatives by each member country with a one-year term with the conference. Now, kani mga board of directors, they are responsible for managing the organization, convening the conference, and drawing up the annual budget. Aside from this, they also have a secretariat which is headed by a secretary general appointed by the conference with a three-year term, whose job is mostly focused around research and energy studies divisions. Next slide, please. Now, OPEC claims that its members collectively own about four-fifths of the world's petroleum reserves, as was said a while ago. Well, it is a significantly huge fraction, and they are accountable for at least two-fifths of world oil production. But When we talk about individual contributions, members differ in a variety of ways. For example, the size of oil reserves, the geographic location, the religion, and economic and political interests. There are members such as Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates na a huge amount of per capita oil reserves, financially stable, and have the capability to be flexible in terms of adjusting their production. Saudi Arabia, which has the second largest reserves and a relatively small population, has played a major role in determining overall production and prices. However, Venezuela, on the other hand, has the largest reserves, but they only produce a fraction sa kung unsa ang gina-produce na percentage sa Saudi Arabia. Just like any international organizations, the OPEC has never been a perfect organization to begin with. They have experienced numerous conflicts throughout history, and because of these conflicts, some experts concluded that it is not a cartel, while other experts contrast but has not been equally effective at all times. Next slide, please. Sorry, previous. Next slide, please. Back pa, ma'am.
Yun lang po yung slide na nakalagay po, Sir Kenneth.
Okay po. Yeah, not a problem.
Shall we continue? Okay, OPEC's
Excuse me.
recent decisions and its three goals. So this is the timeline of their um, of of OPEC's recent decisions. As the previous reporter claimed that OPEC has had a lot of allegations and controversies. True enough, in April 2012, the the price of the oil per barrel has seen a spike for a record high $108. And during that year, specifically that month, their shares in the global oil market is 44.5%. We can safely say that they predominantly control global oil market. In 2014, shares went down to 41.8, but still relatively a huge percentage. December 2015, the oil price went down to 34.72 per barrel because of dominant American uh, natural gas uh, production. In November 30, 2016, because um, the previous reporter said that OPEC has become highly politicized. Um, in 2016, they cut production by 1.2 million barrels, and because of the prior year's oil price, which is $34.72 per barrel, because of the law of supply, they decided to cut production to at least increase the price of oil. In November 30, 2017, OPEC agreed to withhold 2% of global oil supply. And this is an effect of the politicized and stingy um, reaction of OPEC. In December 7, 2018, they fortified the November 30, 2016 policy, which is to cut production by 1.2 million barrels. And in early fall 2019, their goal, which we'll be discussing in a minute or in a second, their barrel cost $70. And in November of the same season, the price went down to $65. Next slide, please. As any individual or entity there is, next slide, please. As any entity or individual there is, goals aren't meant to be followed to the T. Um, the OPEC's first goal was to keep prices stable, and oil prices, OPEC believes, are traditionally between $70 and $80 per barrel. Um, there are moments that they fulfilled their belief of a $70 and $80 per barrel. However, It isn't intentional, or may be in response to prices. Iran's price is $60. Their selling price in the global market is $60 per barrel. Um, Iran believe that their break-even value, excuse me, is $50. The break-even value means that uh, the amount that suffices the production of oil. So uh, it covers production costs, labor, manual, everything that makes that they can produce oil. However, they put a $10 revenue margin to at least um, give revenue to the government. In Saudi Arabia, which has a lot of monetary reserves, they sell their oil at a $70 market value. Uh, Realistically speaking, because they have a lot of reserves, monetary reserves, Saudi Arabia can sell their oil between $2 and $20. However, the members of OPEC are nations that are heavily reliant on petrodollars. So they have to at least make money out of it. So they put in a at least $50 revenue margin. And of the prices of oil that are produced by OPEC members are reliant on the North America's shale oil fields. We already discussed, the first reporter already discussed it earlier. However, um, they still dominate the global oil market because North America have issues with the production of shale oil fields. It is politicized in America due to environmental issues as well as job offers, which is not really covered in this discussion. Next, a second goal is reduce oil price volatility. OPEC believes that the production of oil should be 24 hours, 7 days a week operation. And ocean drilling, if you observe that the members of OPEC are in landlocked lands or premise, um, mostly in Middle East, right? So ocean drilling is out of the picture because first it is very expensive and difficult. Maintenance would be a problem. And between 2007 and 2009, Great Recession happened. Specifically in year 2008, um, the price of oil per barrel has hit a record high of $143 because of demand. And later, the price per barrel became 33.73. As any um, goods or services, it is heavily reliant and dependent on the law of demand and supply. Law of demand, they believe that the higher the price, the higher the demand. And in law of supply, the higher the price, the higher the supply. So if we going to backtrack with earlier, in December 2015, because of too much supply of oil, the price hit a low of 33.73. Third goal is adjust the world's oil supply. OPEC is the main entity that provides or responds to oil shortages in the world. Um, and they are the supplier of oil during crisis, and true enough, they supplied oil um, the during uh, the Gulf crisis in 1990, and OPEC also increased production in 2011 during the crisis in Libya. So we can brazenly claim that OPEC is affected to world affairs. Um, as a testament, very recently, in recent months, the Ukraine crisis has affected global oil market. If we're going to dissect it and analyze why OPEC and the global oil market is affected with the invasion, is because shipping oil is very expensive, and to cut costs they have to travel through land, and the main route of um, of exportation of oil from Middle East to other nations is through Russia. Since Russia closed the their borders, no other nation can get in. It heavily affected OPEC, and not only is Russia under scrutiny of economic pressure and sanctions, OPEC is also pressured with the response of Russia to the sanctions. That would be all. Thank you.
Hello again. My name is Leia Ople, and I'll be discussing about the international political economy of food and hunger and the fight against it. So, okay, give me one moment. The IPE of food and hunger. Okay, so um, in the 18th and 19th century, just a little recap that the political economy was referred to concerns classified under the discipline of economics. And okay, and in the 20th century, Marxist and social democratic critics of the emergent discipline, who believed it was blind to systematic social inequalities, primarily used the term. In the 21st century, inequality, both national and international, continued as the hallmark of any work identified with the tradition of political economy. So the three kinds of work typically are classified under the rubric of political economy of food. The most widely recognized is the political economy of hunger, especially um, the work of the Nobel Amartya Sen. A second group concentrates on the food fights between great powers, such as the conflicts between Japan and the United States over rice imports into Japan. And the third group focuses on the development of underdevelopment, that is, processes by which poor nations are kept poor. So, um, according to Amartya Sen, famines occur not because of too many mouths to feed, but because the poor cannot access food. Famines in the late 20th century occurred in sparsely populated regions such as Sub-Saharan Africa, not in densely populated China, India, or Bangladesh. Although populations continue to grow dramatically in India and Bangladesh, those nations last experienced famines in 1947 and 1974 respectively, the dates they became independent. This implies that where political will exists, famines can be averted by following famine codes. Okay. And developed in British India in the 1880s, famine codes are both early warning system and suggested countermeasures such as wage employment in public works. Famine codes are only effective in the presence of a relatively coherent public administration and transportation and communication infrastructures. Um, okay, give me one moment. Um, Okay. The last catastrophic famine in China was probably which probably killed 20 million people between 1959 and 1961 occurred in the context of a disintegrating communication system within the Chinese Communist Party. This is under Mao Zedong. If I was not mistaken, it is when he has to turn over the his admin or his leadership to Deng Xiaoping because he's set to be independent from, I think it was some, I forgot the union. So yeah, because of that, uh, there were shortage, and Deng Xiaoping then just a little um, idea about it, or yeah, that Deng Xiaoping mentioned, or it was under his political thought, that um, China should open its borders to help or to trade from other countries. So, anyways, um, why repeated famines in sub-Saharan Africa? The immediate problems of Eastern Sub-Saharan Africa are civil war and the dispersal of rural population, which is 18 persons per square kilometer, compared to 228 for India, 681 for Bangladesh, and 104 for Nigeria. In a dispersed population, the transportation system is underdeveloped and cannot support relief efforts. Dispersed settlements also provide little scope for building efficiencies in terms of the social division of labor and market development. Therefore, um, um, Uh, so furthermore, in much of this part of Africa, the primary form of agriculture is slash and burn cultivation, which is a fragile system of sustenance in the first place. Yet, such an extensive approach is essential to survival on land of some of the poorest quality anywhere in the world. On the African continent, 60% of the area has high expectation of drought, and only 30% of the land is suited to rain-fed production of millet, sorghum, and maize. So most people starve because they are either unemployed or the price of the agricultural commodity they sell is so low they cannot afford enough food in exchange. If the latter is the cause, as in most of sub-Saharan Africa, producing more cheap food in the first world for export to the poor nation drives down prices further and creates more misery. So um it uh okay, so this happens basically when um there is a big demand of food, like it is a basic necessity. However, um it is a law in economics that when you are forced to sell because you need to live, you have to be the one to adjust for the prices, unlike for those who need to have, or like in the first world countries, so they have other options, they have other sources. Whereas if you are the source of the raw materials, such as the sub-Saharan Africa, they have to sell it on a cheaper price so that the clients will choose them as um, as the uh, as the one to provide for the product. Okay. And okay, so um, okay, mm, okay. Uh, Okay, so food fights, geopolitics have been central to highly visible food fights between the affluent nations of European Union and the United States and Japan. In the 1940s, the United States and the European nations assumed that agriculture would be relatively protected for reasons of Reconstruction following World War II. But once the Western European farmers revived, the US government defended its share of the domestic agricultural market in 1952 Defense Production Act, which banned the importation of anything from Danish cheese to Turkish sultana raisins. And by 1975, when the European community had become a net exporter of wheat, the transatlantic trade conflict had become significantly hotter. Um, so in 1992, the Common Agricultural Policy of the European Union introduced support for domestic oilseed production and brought the transatlantic cousins to the brink of a trade war. Subsequently, the most visible fights centered on hormone injected beefs and bananas. And so, okay. Mm. So, uh, mm, okay, so yeah, okay. So protected rights remained an irritant in U.S.-Japanese relations in the 21st century. And the United States allowed Japanese protection of farm incomes for both the sake of recovery and in the interest of strengthening Japanese democracy. However, once the Japanese economy was independent, it inevitably generated a conflict with the United States over markets and farm subsidies. This time, instead of centering on wheat, maize, dairy products, and soybeans as with Europe, the conflict concerned rice, citrus beef, soybeans. Eventually, the parties compromised on Japanese national sufficiency in rice and dependence on the United States. Okay. The development for underdevelopment. Political economists for underdevelopment concentrate on a segment of the international trade in the food products that is distorted to benefit first world nations. Their basic argument is that free trade in food products never has existed. The US government, among the most ideologically committed proponents of the free trade, paid American farmers $71.5 billion in agricultural subsidies between 1996 and 2000 while pressuring third world nations to remove subsidies to their farmers. The first world nations heavily subsidized their capital intensive agricultural systems. International trade in agricultural produce is shaped not by comparative advantage but by comparative access to subsidies. So this one. Highly subsidized first world agricultural surpluses have created a serious disincentive for poor farmers in the developing world. Furthermore, furthermore, it is argued that these unfair trade practices serve the interests of large corporations in the first world, such as General Foods, as illustrated by the case of instant coffee, the penultimate product of a commodity chain that begins with green coffee beans, uh, because coffee is grown mostly in third world countries and is consumed in the first world. So, most value added parts of roasting, grinding, and packaging are done in the first world countries. At the end of World War II, the market was dominated first by the market was dominated by first world corporations, but major producers for green coffee such as Brazil sought forward integration from coffee to instant coffee. Okay, so yeah, Brazilian prices were about 20% lower and the quality of the powder was higher. So General Foods, of course, opposed to Brazilian imports that cut the company's profits. So um, So yeah, okay. Okay. In the larger pattern, Mark Davis, I will just add, in 2001 showed how colonial governments created the third world at the end of the 19th century through agricultural policies of the course of subsistence crisis. So these crises were triggered by El Nino, capitalism, and others. So how to fight against hunger? So in 2015, 17.2% of the population lived under the poverty threshold. So this is um so yeah. Um Amardo Amado Parawan is the health and nutrition advisor for the organization called Save the Children. So it is one of the big organizations that helped or that is known in the Philippines to help the feed the children or feed those who are not able or who do not have access to food. So he recently urged Filipino presidential candidates to reevaluate their methodologies to address hunger in the Philippines because Parawan stated that feeding programs are really only a band-aid solution to solving the infection of hunger and malnutrition. In addition, he encouraged them to seek foreign aid and consult experts on globally accepted intervention policies. So, yeah, his plea to candidates follows a recent initiative by Save the Children Philippines called the Lahat Dapat campaign. This movement highlights the importance of healthcare in the prenatal and early stages of development for Filipino children. One of the greatest, according to him as well, one of the greatest problems in the world today is hunger. So, um, yeah, as I mentioned a while ago, that there is really a big difference, or it is a chain how the first world countries handle the third world countries. So, according to Stan, again, that hunger or or famine is not a result. That there are too many mouths to be fed. So, in this case, I agree with Parawan that we have to seek help from the from internationally, use our international relationships with other countries so that they will be able to give more options to adjust border ties for our government, for the exchange of the raw and um, for the raw products with the products that are that will be used or that is ready to be used. So yeah, action. There are actually five organizations, but I did not put everything that are the really like the biggest organizations that help battling hunger in the Philippines. So, Action Against Hunger is an organization that has worked in the Philippines since 2000. Since then, it has aided a total of 302 and 14,000 Filipinos in poverty to improve various aspects of their daily lives. So, another is the World Food Program. This tackle hunger in the Philippines with an emphasis on rebuilding communities. For example, its food and cash assistance program provide aid in exchange for participation in vocational skill training and asset creation activities. So Fill the Nutrient Gap is a major project of the WFP that aims to address malnutrition among children, which can cause health issues like stunted growth. So WFP actually believes that it has to start within the community. That's why they have these projects that starts within the community or that provides skill-based trainings, so that they won't just be able to feed mouths, but they will be able to help give trainings that people can use. 83,000 people in 38 communities Through the use of child focused community development, the organization helps children overcome both short term and long term hunger issues. CFCD approach works with vulnerable and at risk children as well as their caregivers and communities. So, Rise Against Hunger, Food for the Hungry. So, both have been very active in helping, donating the Filipinos. And so, yeah, that is the end of my report.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks to the good area reporter of our day. For now, this is my report. Effort and effects after World War II, and you can also read and listen because I will just read it too. All right. One of the most gruesome war of all time, World War II, is best known for the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by the United States and European Jew by Nazi Germany. However, they do exist several facts about it which to continue to elude most of the people out there. World War II was fought between two military alliances, the Allies which compressed the Soviet Union, United States of America, United Kingdom, and other nations, and the Axis, made up by Germany, Italy, Japan, etc. Next. The war began on September 1, 1939, when the German forces invaded Poland, and in retaliation, France and other European nations attacked Germany. It went on for 6 years before culminating with the victory of the Allies on September 2, 1945. By then, through the damage was already done, and the effect of this 6 years long conflict had become more than obvious. It took a long time for the affected countries to recover. Next slide, please. These are the impact of the Second World War. Socially, baby boomer after the war, there was a large population growth in the world. 77 million Americans was born during this period. However, now that baby boomers became older and requires extended health care, baby boomer baby boomers were comprise nearly 27% of the US population as of today. Next. Economically, Reconstruction caused after the war. Most countries encountered heavy losses in agricultural, industrial, and especially economical. The government had to spend lots of money to rebuild their industrial and infrastructure. And balance between light and heavy money manufacture when the war ended, light and heavy industry became unbalanced and it causes a serious trouble for our society. Next. Environmentally, atomic bomb dropped at Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the time of explosion. People within diameter of 500 meters were instantly vaporized, and around 80,000 people was killed instantly. Total casualty was around 135,000 people. While there was became increasing attention to hungry relief from the late 19th century, Dr. David Griggs has summarized the prior to the end of the World War II. World hunger still receives relatively little academic or political attention, whereas after 1945, there was an explosion of interest in the topic. Next. After World War II, a new international political economic order came into being. which was later described as embedded liberalism for at least the first decade after the war. The United States, then by four periods most dominant national actor, was strongly supportive of effort to tackle world hunger and to promote international development. It heavily funded the United Nations development programs and later the effort of other multilateral organizations like the International Monetary Fund (IMF) and the World Bank (WB). Next. Following successful post-World War II reconstruction of Germany and Japan, the IMF and WB began to turn their next page, please. Organizations such as First Race the issue of food sovereignty and claimed that every country on earth, minor exemptions of the city-states, has sufficient agricultural capacity to feed its own people, but but that the free trade economic order, which from the late 1970s to about 2008 had been associated with such institutions as the IMF and World Bank, had prevented this from happening. Next is Mary Faye Pelicano. Actually, Mary Faye is not around because Mary Faye can't report. I will also read her part because her internet connection is weak and has a problem now. Next page. The topic of hunger and relief. After the Millennium Development Goals (MDGs) expired in 2015, the Sustainable Development Goals (SDGs) became key objective to shape the world response to development challenges such as hunger. The UN is central to global effort to relieve hunger, most notably through the FAO, but also through other agencies such as WFP, IFAD, WHO, and UNICEF. In Goal 2, Zero Hunger establishes universally agreed upon aim to eliminate hunger, increase food security and nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. Next. Hundreds of other actors in addition to UN agencies work to combat hunger in the world scale, frequently through involvement in major umbrella groups, national government, religious organizations, international charities, and in certain situations, multinational enterprises, and among them, except in the case of specialized charities, the emphasis given to hunger relief by this group might change from year to year. True group frequently collaborate with UN agencies, but they also pursue their own objectives. For example, while a consensus has emerged for the SDG Zero Hunger objective of ending hunger by 2030, a number of groups have launched campaign with a more ambitious goal of achieving this goal sooner by 2025. Next. Caritas International launched a Caritas-wide project in 2013 with the goal of abolishing systematic hunger by 2015. The One Human Family Food for All by the International Food Policy Research Institute and involving UN organizations and private foundations develop and disseminates evidence-based advice to politicians and other decision makers with the goal of ending hunger and undernutrition in the next 10 years by 2025. Its assertion that hunger can be eradicated by 2025 is based on a paper by Sergeant Fan and Pullman that studied the experiences of China, Vietnam, Brazil, and Thailand and concluded that the hunger and malnutrition might be eradicated by 2025 next. The European Union and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation announced cooperation in June 2015 to address undernutrition, particularly among children. The initiative will be given in Bangladesh, Burundi, Ethiopia, Kenya, Laos, and Nigeria, and will assist these countries in improving nutrition information and analysis in order to build successful national nutrition policies. Oh, thank you. It's amazing that I'm good at reading so far. Let's listen to the next reporter. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Kuya Ali. Good noon, everyone. Once again, I'm Carlos Shapimueka, and for this afternoon, I will be discussing global environmental problems and its political economics connections. So, when we say manggod na environmental problems and its political economic connection, this is this is a global environmental politics, which is a relatively new field of study within international relations that focuses on issues related to the interaction of humans and the natural world. It was only in the 1980s and into the 1990s that global environmental politics began to establish itself as a distinct field with its own dedicated journals and publishers, and the focus of this expanded to include global environmental problems such as ozone depletion, climate change, biodiversity loss, deforestation, and desertification. It has emerged as a center of interdisciplinary work that integrates research from a range of fields, including geography, economics, history, law, biology, and numerous others. So environmental issues. So when we say environmental issues, it is like ano na siya, this is quite self-explanatory. It's because when we say environmental issues, this is issues regarding environment. So when we say environmental issues, these are harmful effects of human activity on the biophysical environment. So when we so human activities harm the environment. It's because human impacts the physical environment in many ways, such as overpopulation, pollution, burning fossil fuels, and deforestation. So changes like this have triggered climate change, soil erosion, poor air quality, and undrinkable water. So these negative impacts can affect human behavior and can prompt mass migrations or battles over accessible basic needs. So also, human activities affect the environment by contributing to air pollution or the emission of harmful substances into the air. While it can be difficult to understand which pollutants are associated with specific effects on the environment or public health, it is generally accepted that air pollution can indeed cause public health problems and also harm plants and animal life. And pollution isn't just limited to the air. It can affect soil or waterways and can come from human waste, industrial chemicals, and other sources. These toxins can exert tremendous effects on the natural world, leading to environmental degradation and problems like acid rain and harmful algal blooms in the ocean. Environmental protection is a practice of protecting the natural environment on the individual, organizational, or governmental levels for the benefit of both the environment and humans. So when we say environmental protection laws on the local and federal level have been enacted as a means to stem the ecological damage caused by pollution, and some communities have engaged in ongoing conversations aimed toward promoting sustainable, low impact living. Environmental destruction caused by humans is a global and ongoing problem. This is a ongoing problem. It's because the carbon dioxide equivalent of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere has already exceeded 400 parts per million, with a total long-term greenhouse gases exceeding 455 parts per million, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate report. So the amount of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere is possibly above the threshold that can potentially cause climate change. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has stated that climate change is not just a distant
Pabigay kay
future
mama
threat.
dyan, no? May
It
mga
is the
price
main
ng mga
driver
vaccination
behind
daw.
rising humanitarian needs, and we are seeing its impact. The number of people affected and damages inflicted by extreme weather has been unprecedented. So, with regard to the environmental issues, it is really impossible to eliminate these problems. But what we can do is practicing sustainability, and that is like the best way to lessen the environmental issues. So next slide, please. So when we say sustainability, it is the key to prevent or reduce the effect of environmental issues. So when we say sustainability, it is important because of how much energy, food, and human-made resources we use every day. Rapid population growth has resulted in increased farming and manufacturing, leading to more greenhouse gas emissions, unsustainable energy use, and deforestation. So, in other words, we need more energy and materials than ever before. And despite this, our planet can only provide so many resources before they begin to deplete. For this reason, business must step in and do their part. They have more power than any group of individuals, and they can help secure a livable future by investing in sustainable and responsible practices like reducing waste, using commercial clean energy, and paying fair wages. After all, sustainability aims to improve the quality of human life without putting unnecessary strain on the Earth's supporting ecosystems. It's about creating an equilibrium between consumers, human culture, and the living world. We can do this by living in a way that doesn't waste or unnecessarily deplete natural resources. So, for humans to live sustainability, the Earth's natural resources must be used at a rate at which they can be replenished, and by limiting global warming. This condition is I'm very sorry, guys. So, again, okay, sorry for the interruption. So we can do this by living in a way that doesn't waste or unnecessarily deplete natural resources. So for humans to live sustainability, the Earth's natural resources must be used at a rate at which they can be replenished. And by limiting global warming, this condition is measured by ecological footprint accounting. So as an individual, we can take small but effective steps towards a more sustainable lifestyle, like using less water, reducing our meat consumption, and switching to renewable energy in warehouses, factories, and offices, or cutting down on a single-use plastics in manufacturing. Next slide, please. So global warming. So when we say global warming, it is the phenomenon of increasing average air temperature near the surface of Earth over the past 1 to 2 centuries. Global warming is the long-term heating of Earth's climate system observed since the pre-industrial period between 1850 and 1900s. Due to human activities, primarily fossil fuel burning, which increases heat trapping greenhouse gas levels in Earth's atmosphere, the term is frequently used interchangeably with the term climate change, though the latter refers to both human and naturally produced warming and the effects it has on our planet. It is most commonly measured as the average increase in Earth's global surface temperature. Since the pre-industrial period, human activities are estimated to have increased Earth's global average temperature by 1 degree Celsius or 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit, a number that is currently increasing by zero point 0.2 degrees Celsius or 0.36 degrees Fahrenheit per decade. It is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. Changes observed in Earth's climate since the early 20th century are primarily driven by human activities, particularly fossil fuel burning, which increases heat trapping greenhouse gas levels in Earth's atmosphere, raising Earth's average surface temperature. This human produced temperature increase are commonly referred to as global warming. Many climate scientists agree that significant societal, economic, and ecological damage would result if global average temperature rose by more than 2 degrees Celsius or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit in such a short time. So, such damage would increase extinction of many plant and animal species, shifts in patterns of agriculture, and rising sea levels. By 2015, all but a few national governments had begun the process of instituting carbon reduction plans as part of the Paris Agreement, a treaty designed to help countries keep global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial levels in order to avoid the worst of the predicated effects. Authors of a special report published by the Ipcc in 2018 noted that should carbon emissions continue at their present rate, the increase in average near surface air temperatures would reach 1.5 degrees Celsius sometime between 2030 and 2052. Past IPCC assessments reported that the global average sea level rose by some 19 to 21 centimeter or 7.5 to 8.3 inches between 1901 and 2010, and that sea levels rose faster in the second half of the 20th century than in the first half. It also predicted again that the global average sea level would rise 26 to 77 centimeter or 10.2 to 30.3 inches relative to the 1986 to 2005 average by 2100 for global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius, an average of 10% or 3.9 inches less than what would be expected if warming rose to 2 degrees or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial levels. Next slide, please. Of all these gases, carbon dioxide is the most important, both for its role in the greenhouse effect and for its role in the human economy. It has been estimated that at the beginning of the industrial age in the mid 18th century, carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere were roughly 280 parts per million or ppm. So carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, a gas that absorbs and radiates heat. Warmed by sunlight, Earth's land and ocean surfaces continuously radiate thermal infrared energy or heat. Unlike oxygen and Unlike oxygen or nitrogen, which make up most of our atmosphere, greenhouse gases absorb that heat and release it gradually over time, like bricks in a fireplace after the fire goes out. Without this natural greenhouse effect, Earth's average annual temperature would be below freezing instead of close to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. But increases in greenhouse gases have chipped the Earth's energy budget out of balance, trapping additional heat and raising Earth's average temperature. Carbon dioxide is the most important of Earth's long-lived greenhouse gases because it absorbs less heat per molecule than the greenhouse gases methane or nitrous oxide, but it's more abundant and it stays in the atmosphere much longer. Increases in atmospheric carbon dioxide are responsible for two-thirds of the total energy imbalance that is causing Earth's temperature to rise. Another reason carbon dioxide is important in the Earth system is that it dissolves in the ocean like the peas in a can of soda. It reacts with water molecules, producing carbonic acid and lowering the ocean's pH, raising its acidity. Since the start of industrial period, the pH of the ocean's surface waters has dropped from 8.21 to 8.10. This drop in pH is called ocean acidification. So, humans have caused major climate changes to happen already, and we have set in motion more changes still. However, if we stop emitting greenhouse gases today, the rise in global temperatures would begin to flatten within a few years. Temperatures would then plateau but remain well elevated for many centuries. There is a time lag between what we do and when we feel it, but that lag is less than a decade. While the effects of human activities on Earth's climate to date are irreversible on the timescale of humans alive today, every little bit of avoided future temperatures increases results in less warming that would otherwise persist for essentially forever. The benefits of reduced greenhouse gas emissions occur in the same timescale as the political decisions that lead to those reductions. And this would be my report, guys. Thank you so much. And I'm giving this stage for the another reporter. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So this afternoon, I'll be discussing the global warming and public policy and the IPCC and the scientific consensus. So global warming and public policy. So as we all know, global warming is highly affected by the public policy or what kind of policy making are these regions or countries have been instigating. So since next PowerPoint, please. So in the beginning of 19th century, many researchers working across a wide range of academic disciplines have contributed to an enhanced understanding of the atmosphere as well as the global climate system. So next, okay, balik-balik daw. Sorry. Okay. So the concerns among these prominent climate scientists were the global warming and the human-induced or anthropogenic climate change that arose in the mid-20th century. So the most scientific and political discourse, however, was discoursed and did not begin until the 1980s. Next. Next PowerPoint. I delete last and last. Sorry. Ano, katong ano, nalampasan siya. Yan, okay. So today, leading climate scientists believe that many of the ongoing changes to the global climate system are mainly triggered by the release of greenhouse gases. These greenhouse gases, which I will no longer discuss, was already tackled by Mr. Carl Hueca. And then these gases that enhances Earth's natural greenhouse effect uh, mainly affect the status of our climate or climatic system. So most greenhouse gases are released by burning of fossil fuels. So aside from burning of fossil fuels, there are a lot of reasons why we have this kind of phenomenon. Okay, points. So there are others who argue with this kind of claim. They stress that the role of natural factors in past climatic variation have accentuated the scientific uncertainties associated with data on global warming and climate change. Nonetheless, global warming and public policy would highly affect, as I've said, the global warming or the climate change that are happening these days. So bad governance would adversely affect a certain region, perhaps the globe, with its challenges regarding or its concerns regarding the climate. Next PowerPoint, please. So all countries emit greenhouse gases. However, these highly industrialized countries and those who are populous emit significantly greater quantities than the others. So there are countries na higher the rate of industrialization as well as population would probably would probably have the most number of greenhouse gas emission or the emission that can cause greenhouse gases. And countries in North America and Europe that where the first industrialization have been started were responsible for releasing most greenhouse gases in the absolute cumulative term since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in the mid 18th century. So next is the Industrial Revolution that these days countries are being joined in a large developing countries, growing release and greenhouse gases, including the United States. So isa sila sa mga pioneering countries or the giant countries that have been called out for a higher percentage of greenhouse gas emission, wherein their population as well are quite huge. Okay, next PowerPoint, please. Next PowerPoint. Okay, let's move on to the IPCC and scientific consensus. But before we will move on, let's first wrap up our discussion in the public policy and global warming. So it is quite concerning that bad governance greatly affects the status quo of our people, the government, as well as the status of our climate. So the climate change may have been caused by bad governance, and of course, with bad governance, people might have practiced bad practices or bad habits like burning of plastics, perhaps, that of course affects the status right now, currently, of our climate and our variation of weathers and whatsoever. The next part is the IPCC and the scientific consensus. So this is a study or a think tank concerning public policy as well as global warming. Next PowerPoint, please. So an important first step. Okay, in 1998, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, was established by the World Meteorological Organization as well as the United Nations Environment Program. So the IPCC is mandated to assess and summarize the latest scientific, technical, and socio-economic data on climate change and publish its findings in reports presented to the international organizations and the national governments all over the world. So the IPCC is mandating and as well responsible with the assessment and summarization of scientific, technical, socio-economic data regarding climate change, as well as its counterpart, which is the public policies. Regarding to the many thousands of world's leading scientists, experts have been expressing their ideas in areas of global warming that climate change have worked under the IPCC, producing major sets of assessment, mainly in 1990, 1995, 2001, 2007, and 2014. Next PowerPoint, please. Okay. Okay, next. So the first IPCC report was published in 1990. It states that good deal of data showed that human activity affected the cases or the cause and effects of global warming and climate change at that time. So it was anthropologic, which means it is human activity or human induced phenomena. Next report is the IPCC's, no, not the next PowerPoint. Balik po. Okay. Sa second report. Nope. Balik sa ano po. Yes. No. sa yung sa first katabi. Okay. So I will be presenting to you the second report, which was during the fourth assessment, which was issued in 2007. Let's proceed to the fourth assessment, issued in 2007, reaffirming the main conclusions of earlier reports, as well as the authors that have stated where it was regarded as a conservative judgment. They have been at least 90% to be certain that most of the warming was observed over the previous half century and had been caused by the release of greenhouse gases through a multitude of human activities. Again, it is anthropological. So both 2001 and 2007 reports stated that during 20th century, there had been an increase in global average surface of temperature. So it's no longer in the normal surface, so it already risen, no? It already exceeded the normal rate of temperature, which is expected by most scientists. So the IPCC's fifth assessment, released in 2014. Next, sa ano po? Fifth assessment. Next. Okay. Released in 2014, further refined refined the projected increases in a global average temperature and sea level. The 2014 report stated that the interval between 1880 and 2012 saw an increase in global average temperature of approximately 0.85 degrees Celsius or 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit, and that the interval between 1901 and 2010 saw an increase in global average sea level about 19 to 21 centimeters. So the report predicted that by the end of 21st century, surface temperature across the globe would probably increase between 0.3 and 4.8 degrees Celsius. Going beyond the data, it is quite disconcerting and concerning that through public policies and the contributions of these giant countries and even the small countries would, of course, greatly affect the increase of temperature and probably, definitely, the increase of sea level. No? Each IPCC report has helped to build a scientific consensus that elevated concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, wherein major drivers of rising near surface air temperatures and their associated ongoing climatic changes. In this respect, the current episode of climate changes, which began from the middle of the 20th century, is seen to be fundamentally different from the earlier periods in that critical adjustments have been caused by activities resulting from human behavior rather than the non-anthropologic factors or non-human activities. The IPCC's 2007 assessment projected that future climatic changes could be expected to include continued warming, modifications and precipitation patterns and amounts, elevated sea level, and changes in frequency and intensity of some extreme events. So, of course, as what NASA scientists have said in the recent news in the international media, climate change is quite disturbing and it's frightening not only those who are in the United States but as well those countries like in the Pacific where sea level are is a great scare. And of course, this is highly affected by public policy making, perhaps with industrialization caused by globalization as well as the international political economy. So, with public policy, there is politics in globalization and perhaps in economic mercantilism and whatsoever that have been causing these activities worldwide. And once again, this is my reporting. Thank you very much. And let's proceed to the next reporter.
The UN Framework Convention and the Kyoto Protocol. So, from hearing from the last two of the reporters, they tackled about negative effects, how these greenhouse gases and some of the environmental issues and problems that the economics has brought to the world. But now we are about to begin about the more positive and substantial side of these environmental problems. So this topic, the UN framework, so so the Kyoto Protocol was adopted at the third conference of the parties to the UNFCCC in Kyoto. The COP3 is the conference of the parties in Kyoto, Japan on 11 December 1997. The protocol shares the objective and institutions of the convention. The major distinction between the two, however, is that while the convention encouraged industrialized countries to stabilize GHG emissions, greenhouse gases, the protocol commits them to do so. The detailed rules for its implementation were adopted at COP 7 in Marrakesh in 2001 are called the Marrakesh Accord. So this Kyoto Protocol is an international treaty that was made effective in the year 2005 by the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So the treaty was designed to set binding obligations on industrialized countries or any DCs to reduce emissions of major greenhouse gases. So this involves support for renewable energy, the improvement of energy efficiency, and the reduction of deforestation. So UNFCCC's primary goal is to prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference of the climate system and the stabilization of the concentration of gases in the atmosphere. So, more so, it is also important to note that LEDCs do not have binding targets under the Kyoto Protocol, but are, however, committed by the treaty to reduce our emissions. So this is because they are not seen as main culprits for emissions during the current period of industrialization. Next slide, please. Protocol places a heavier burden on developed nations under the principle in common but differentiated responsibility. 37 industrialized countries and the European community have committed to reducing their emissions by an average of 5% against 1990 levels over the 5-year period of 2008 to 2012. For this group of countries, reductions of 11% are projected this Kyoto commitment period from 2008 to 2012. Provided policies and measures planned by these countries are put in place, these countries will also have to make use of the protocol's flexible mechanisms in order to reach their collective emission reduction goals. So the reason for the creation of the Kyoto Protocol was that developed countries have contributed the most of the build-up of the CO emission in the atmosphere, which was around 77, according to research, of emissions between 1750 and 2004. So in the UN estimate of 2008 emissions, it shows that out of the total of, there are 29,888,121 tons of CO2 emissions and 9,638,831 tons originated from the US and the EU combined. So there are countries who committed to this treaties, and those countries, USA, in the year of 2012 have reduced their greenhouse gas emissions by 7%, and the EU, the European Union, reduced their emissions by 8%. Russia, they haven't reduced their emissions by that year. And Japan, with 6%, Canada, 6%, and unfortunately, Australia did not reduce their emissions, but instead they made an increase of their emissions of their greenhouse gases by 8%. So, next slide, please. So this is the image of their convention, the Kyoto Protocol to the UN framework on climate change. So, moni ilang countries sa pikas na photo. Next slide, please. So the flexibility in meeting targets, emission targets for industrialized country parties to the Kyoto Protocol are expressed as levels of allowed emissions or assigned amounts over the 2008 to 2012 committed period. Such assigned amounts are denominated in tons of CO2 equivalent emissions. Industrialized countries must first and foremost take domestic action against climate change, but the protocol allows them a certain degree of flexibility in meeting their emission reduction commitments through three innovative market-based mechanisms. So the targets for the first commitment period are over the emissions of the six main greenhouse gases. This includes carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and hydrofluorocarbons, for fluorocarbons and sulfur hexafluoride. So those greenhouse gases of the top gases which contribute to climate change. And the greenhouse effect is the result of the atmosphere trapping the heat which radiates from Earth to space should climate change continue to at the current rate. So the road ahead, in summary, the Kyoto Protocol is generally seen as an important first step towards a truly global emission reduction regime that will stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations. As a result of the protocol, governments have already put and are continuing to put in place legislations and policies to meet their commitments. A carbon market has been created, and more businesses are making the investment decisions needed for a climate-friendly future. So it is very important that in politics we should consider the climate-friendly future, because in politics you can't just build a business or invest decisions that the climate change are affecting it, that are affecting badly to the environment. So that's why the protocol provides much of the essential architecture for any new international agreement or environment friendly of set of agreements of climate change. Thank you, and that is the end of my report.
Hello. Next slide first, please. Ayan. Okay. By the way, my name is Melchizedek Esumandang, and for that, I'll be the one to report for future climate change policy. And next slide, please. Okay. For this one, 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. This one, long-term goals formulated in Europe and the United States seek to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by up to 80% by the middle of the 21st century. The Paris Agreement sets out a global framework to avoid dangerous climate change by limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius and pursuing efforts to limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius. In this case, by the way, the Paris Agreement reaffirms that developed countries should take the lead in providing financial assistance to countries that are less endowed and more vulnerable, while for the first time also encouraging voluntary contributions by other parties, um, most usually the ones that is part of the agreement. And also, it aims to strengthen countries' ability to deal with the impacts of climate change and support them in their efforts. Hence, this treaty requires an all international action to see the bigger difference. As a matter of fact, United States, China, and India are one of the top countries and a major contributor of carbon emitters. Fortunately, they all signed for the treaty and agreed to reduce the carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions as well. Most usually, we can see here that since they all teamed up for this, um, they basically tried to make policies for burning coals, to ban or to limit or to reduce burning coals, electricity as well. And we can actually see that there is also a policy or restrictions in using cars that produce black smoke. Actually, we can see that here in Philippines as well. But however, President Trump withdrew the U.S. from the Paris Agreement through a process that was finalized last November 4, 2020. Can next slide, please. Ayan. It says there that yeah, since President Trump withdrew the U.S., basically his reason was because the agreement would undermine the U.S. Economy and put the U.S. at a permanent disadvantage. But the word actually since right now since Biden is now the elected president, President-elect Biden has indicated that he will seek to join the U.S. to the Paris Agreement as one of his first acts in office. But actually, on January 20, on his first day in office, President Biden signed the instrument to bring the United States back into the Paris Agreement. For the terms of the agreement, the United States officially become a party again in that kind of treaty or agreement. Next slide, please. Um, what's up? Okay. Locally, in 2005, the U.S. Conference of Mayors adopted the Climate Protection Agreement, in which cities committed to reduce emissions to 7% below 1990 levels by 2012. So we can see that actually community cities are now initiating a multitude of local and sub-regional efforts to reduce their emissions of greenhouse gases. Many of these municipalities are taking action as members of the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives and its Cities for Climate Protection Program, which outlines principles and steps for taking local level action. So, next slide, please. So, there is actually two types in developing public policies. We can actually see that in the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement as well. But in this case, there's actually two types, which is mitigation policy and the adaptation policy. Adaptation policy. For mitigation policy, it focuses on different ways to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases. As most emissions come from the burning of fossil fuels for energy and transportation, much of the mitigation policy focuses on switching to less carbon intensive energy sources, um, such as wind turbines, solar panel, or even hydro powers as well. Improving energy efficiency for vehicles and supporting the development of new technology. Basically, they encourage people that we must transition or change from powering our world with fossil fuels to using clean, renewable energy. And actually, we need to stop deforestation as well and restore our natural habitats until we reach net zero carbon emissions, meaning that the release of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere is balanced with the capture and storage of those gases in places like tree, tree roots or in some sort of a soil as well. Much like investing, basically we are like investing in a retirement fund. The sooner we act to mitigate the impacts of climate change, the better off we'll be in the future. In short, mitigation policy is a human intervention to reduce the emissions of these greenhouse gases. And for adaptation policy, next slide please. Adaptation policy seeks to improve the ability of various societies to face the challenges of a changing climate. For example, some adaptation policies are devised to encourage groups to change from agricultural practices in response to seasonal changes, whereas the other policies are designed to prepare cities located in coastal areas for elevated sea levels. These actions can actually include diversifying crops that can tolerate warmer and drier or wetter conditions. It also adaptation policy also requires ensuring in infrastructure that can withstand from extreme weather or helping communities reduce the risk from sea level rise and increased floods, and also making sure that we can manage our food, water, and other natural resources wisely in the context of a changing climate. In this case, in short, adaptation focuses on protecting our way of life, adjusting how we act and behave to adapt from the future impacts of climate change. So, next slide, please. Testing. Basically, to address global warming and climate change, societies must find ways to fundamentally change their patterns of energy use in favor of less carbon intensive energy generation, transportation, and forest and land use management. We can actually set a good example as well with the ozone layer that is actually healing right now. We can actually see that in Facebook or even in actually news as well. That scientists found out that the use of CFC, which is chlorofluorocarbons, which is widely used in household appliances like refrigerators, air conditioning, and aerosol cans, could actually react with atmospheric ozone, reduce oxygen, and depleting the protective ozone layer. Um, the Vienna Convention saw the Montreal Protocol being signed in 1987 to phase out CFCs. That is why you can see that um, in the past few years they actually have united to make sure that this carbon emissions will be reduced as soon as possible. So actually in these two types of adaptation policy and mitigation policy, we can actually the first thing that we can ask is that which one is better, right? That is why we have the what I actually can say or what I actually can answer for that is that these two should be used together for formulating policy to climate change policy, basically. That is why we have the mitigation approach and adaptation approach. Mitigation approach is for reducing greenhouse gases, and adaptation approach is for changing our behavior and system to adapt to the climate change. So these two approaches in resolving the issue will help us avoid the effects and future impacts of climate change. That's it.
Thank you for the reporter. Good afternoon. I am Jefferson Mintimbang, and I'm here for the conclusion. Since it was a conclusion, I'll just read it for you guys. So bear with me. Um, According to the findings of this analysis, the OPEC has significant price influence through choices on quotas, production, and operational capacity. The OPEC and individual notion decisions on these variables are relatively independent of real oil prices. Indeed, the negative link between price and output should not be uh, construed as proof for OPEC or the majority of its members having a backward bending supply curve. Analysis must consider how they test alternative theories about OPEC behavior in the absence of a co-integrating relationship for production. But unfortunately, this approach indicates little about OPEC's character, such as the cartel dominating producer and free and etc. Or the resource of OPEC employs to establish production quotas and or capacity. To address this issue, continuing research is being conducted to establish a integrating relationship for oil production. Next slide, please. And for the global global problems, the distinctive feature of global problems is the lack of a central authority for coordination and enforcement. Despite this challenge, there are encouraging examples of successful transnational institution formation to address cross-border environmental issues. Success has been greatest in uh, cases such as stratospheric ozone and acid rain, where the problem can be made operational in precise technical terms, where international action can thus focus on tightly defined interventions, and where the perceived benefits of collective action have been high relative to the cost for key actors. Um, Other environmental and social problems will be more difficult before the because the relationship between action and impact is less fully known, as and the cost and benefits of action do not align. However, an adaptable strategy like the one discussed in this chapter has a lot to recommend it, because the frequency and severity of such difficulties are only going to increase as globalization proceeds along many dimensions. That's all po. Thank you.